Have you ever shared your life with someone only to realize too late that they were never truly on your side? My name is Nathan Alex. I'm 48 years old. I've spent the last 2 decades helping others protect their wealth, plan their futures, and prepare for the unexpected. But nothing, no financial crash, no volatile market ever prepared me for the message I received on a quiet Thursday afternoon. It came in the form of a text, short, cold, from my wife of 17 years. She said she needed space, that she had fallen for someone else, that she was staying in Aspen, with him. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, is that I had already seen it coming. And I had been preparing for this very moment for months. This is not just a story about betrayal. It's about foresight. It's about what happens when you stop assuming and start paying attention. And by the end of it, you might not see marriage money or trust the same way again. If this story pulls at something deep in you, if you've ever felt betrayed, let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, and stay with me. This is where it gets real. Before everything changed, our life looked almost perfect from the outside. I met Isabel when I was 30. She worked in corporate PR for a fast-growing tech company in Dallas. She had the kind of charm that could own any room, bright, assertive, magnetic. I was quieter, more methodical, a wealth strategist who preferred spreadsheets to small talk. Somehow that contrast worked. She brought the energy, I brought the balance. After 3 years of dating, we got married in a small ceremony on a vineyard outside Austin. We bought a house in Barton Creek, paid off the mortgage within 8 years. No kids by choice. We traveled, often built savings, slowly avoided flashy spending. I handled the financial planning. She handled the social calendar. It was a partnership that for a long time felt like it had a rhythm. I remember how she used to joke that I was the human seatbelt stable, cautious, always 2 steps ahead. I wore that label with pride. Stability meant safety. And I believed that if I provided, that if I gave her the structure and freedom to grow, she would always feel secure. But over time, something subtle began to shift. At first, it was nothing obvious. A few late nights at work, less laughter at dinner. A sense that her mind was somewhere else when we spoke. She started spending more time on her phone, even when we were sitting side by side. Her tone with me, once warm, turned clipped, like I was an obligation more than a partner. Still, I didn't panic. I chalked it up to stress. Her job was demanding, and she'd recently taken on more travel for what she called executive leadership workshops. I wanted to believe it was all normal, temporary, that with enough patience things would settle. What I didn't know then was that she wasn't just pulling away. She was setting the stage for something much worse. The first real crack showed up one evening after Isabel returned from a team-building retreat in Palm Springs. She seemed different, lighter in a strange way. Not happier exactly, just distant. Her eyes didn't quite meet mine the same way. I asked how the trip went. She gave me the corporate summary: great networking, great energy, exciting growth plans for the company. But something about her delivery felt rehearsed, like she was repeating a line she'd practiced in the mirror. A week later, I noticed a new charge on our joint credit card, $920 at a luxury spa in Colorado. Odd, because the company retreat was supposed to be in California. I asked her about it casually. She blinked, smiled, and said it must have been a mistake, probably from an old trip. She'd handle it. The next day, the charge was gone. I didn't bring it up again, but something inside me shifted. She started going to the gym more, a new one across town. Not the one she used to love near our house. The new one had a spa, a juice bar, and a $300 a month membership. When I asked what made it special, she said it helped her feel seen. That phrase stuck with me, feel seen, as if I hadn't been looking at her every day for the last 17 years. Then came Julian. She first mentioned him over dinner. Julian from marketing, she said, casually, is brilliant. He led our pitch presentation last week, completely transformed the messaging. Nothing wrong with admiring a coworker, but over the next month, his name came up more frequently. Julian says this: Julian thinks that Julian's helping me prep for my regional conference. It was like I'd unknowingly been introduced to a third person in our marriage. Meanwhile, Isabel was traveling more. Company events, workshops, conferences. One trip to Miami for a leadership summit, another to Lake Tahoe for a client immersion experience. I asked once if she wanted me to join her on one of these trips just for a weekend. She smiled politely and said, "It's really more of a professional thing." You know, I nodded, but in my gut something was beginning to stir. It wasn't just suspicion, it was the feeling you get when a storm is forming far off, still invisible. But you can sense the pressure in the air changing. You can smell the rain before it falls. I didn't confront her. Not yet. It wasn't my style to react emotionally, not in life, not in business. Instead, I did what I'd always done when something didn't feel right. I gathered information. Quietly, thoroughly, with precision. The first step was simple. I reviewed our credit card statements going back 6 months. I wasn't looking for anything dramatic, just patterns. And patterns emerged quickly. 5-star restaurants in cities where she'd never mentioned having meetings. Designer boutiques in Aspen. Charges from hotels that weren't part of the conference venues she'd supposedly been attending. Spa visits that coincided with Julian's speaking engagements listed on his company profile. The details didn't lie, even if she was. Next, I synced up her public Instagram with the iCloud calendar she still shared with me, an old habit she probably forgot. Her posts told one story: sleek hotel rooms, elegant cocktails, motivational quotes in gym wear. But her calendar told another. She wasn't in San Diego when she said she was. That week, her flights were booked to Aspen, a private stay at a boutique hotel known more for romantic getaways than corporate conferences. And Julian? He'd posted a story that weekend, a hot tub selfie with a reflection of a familiar face in his sunglasses. He deleted it a few hours later, but I'd already screen recorded it. I installed an AirTag in one of her travel suitcases, something I justified to myself as precaution, not paranoia. When she said she was going to Atlanta for a leadership offsite, the tracker showed her location pinging from Santa Fe. Another resort. Another lie. I didn't tell her. I didn't ask. I kept watching. Then I accessed our shared mileage rewards account. Isabel had never changed the login. I cross-referenced her flight history with her calendar. More discrepancies. Trips she never told me about. First-class upgrades paid for with points from our joint account. Always around the same time Julian was working remotely. I even reviewed her Uber trips, late-night drop-offs at addresses I didn't recognize. One stood out: a luxury high-rise downtown Julian's listed address on his LinkedIn. She'd gone there more than once, always after gym hours, always staying for several hours. Still, I said nothing. Instead, I documented everything. I saved receipts, took screenshots, organized folders, built a timeline. I wasn't angry, I was focused. And the more I saw, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a midlife drift or a harmless flirtation. This was something deeper, coordinated, rehearsed, hidden. And behind that polished smile of hers was a plan already in motion. So I began working on a plan of my own. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I remember because I was in the middle of a quarterly portfolio review with one of my longtime clients. We were discussing estate planning strategies, ironic given what was about to happen. My phone buzzed twice. At first I ignored it, then I glanced at the screen. The message preview stopped me cold. "I'm sorry, Nathan. I need to be honest. I've fallen for someone else. I'm not coming home after this trip. I hope you can understand." I excused myself from the meeting and stepped into my private office. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. I felt still, like I'd reached the moment I'd been walking toward for months. I unlocked the phone and read the full message. "I need space to figure out who I am. Julian understands me in a way you don't anymore. I'm moving in with him just for now. Please don't make this harder than it already is." There was no apology, no remorse, no mention of 17 years, just detachment. I opened our banking app. Our joint checking account, which had just over $62,000 the week before, now showed a balance of $487. I checked the transaction log. 3 large withdrawals over the last 48 hours. 2 wired directly to a new account under her name. 1 debit transaction from an upscale boutique in Aspen. She'd timed it perfectly while I was busy meeting clients, assuming I'd be too distracted to notice. I stared at the screen, not in shock, but in confirmation. The numbers told me what I already knew. This wasn't a mistake, a moment of confusion, or a temporary emotional lapse. It was a plan. Premeditated, executed, clean. An hour later, another message came in. From the same number. Please don't try to contact me. My attorney will be in touch. I'm asking for half of everything. You know that's fair? I took a slow breath, set the phone down, and poured myself a glass of water. Not whiskey, not wine. Water. Because this wasn't a time for numbing. It was a time for clarity. I typed 1 sentence in reply, "Good luck." Then I picked up the phone not to call her, but to call someone else entirely. My attorney, the one I'd quietly retained months ago. Long before that text ever arrived, before the spa charges, before the mysterious flights and hotel bills, I'd already begun preparing for the worst. Not because I was certain she'd leave me, but because in my world, certainty is a luxury you never count on. I've spent 2 decades managing high-net-worth clients who always believed the storm wouldn't come for them, until it did. I wasn't about to be one of them. It started with a feeling, a small one, subtle. The way Isabel asked about our account logins, the way she once joked about how her friend Tammy got half of everything in her divorce. A few harmless-sounding remarks about having something that's just mine. Most husbands might have brushed it off, but I knew better. People speak truths in throwaway sentences. So 3.5 months before she left for Aspen, I scheduled a private meeting with my estate attorney, Claire Newton, a specialist in asset protection and irrevocable trusts. I told her I wanted to begin the process of protecting what I'd built just in case. Claire didn't ask unnecessary questions. She simply got to work. We created 3 trust structures, one for my business assets, client accounts, contract rights, performance bonuses, one for our investment holdings and real estate, and one for my retirement and brokerage accounts. Each was moved legally and quietly with full documentation and 0 ambiguity. The beneficiaries were clear, the ownership shielded. All by the book. Next came the paperwork, transferring ownership out of our joint names and into the new trusts required signatures, hers included. But by then, I'd told Isabel I was consolidating and streamlining for year-end tax planning. She nodded absently over a protein smoothie and signed every page without reading. She was more concerned about which retreat leggings to pack for her wellness weekend than the legal instruments that would soon enough cut her out of everything. The only account I didn't touch was our household, checking the one she would eventually drain. Why? Because letting her access it was strategic. I wanted her to feel in control, to believe she had leverage. I even added small deposits each month to keep it active and unalarming. A breadcrumb trail, nothing more. At home, I played my role well. I didn't withdraw. I didn't accuse. I kept cooking dinner, asking how her day went, acting like I still believed the woman in front of me was the one I'd married. Meanwhile, I was quietly ensuring that when she made her move, the damage she inflicted would be minimal. Surgical. Contained. I also began cataloging everything: photos of credit card statements, screen captures of her travel itineraries, Uber receipts, calendar inconsistencies. A digital archive of truth, not to hurt her, not even to shame her, but to protect myself from the chaos I knew she was capable of unleashing when she finally decided I was no longer useful. It wasn't easy. It's not easy pretending you don't see the storm forming just outside your window. But I've sat through enough market collapses to know panic doesn't protect you. Preparation does. So when the text finally came and the bank balance hit bottom and her lawyer's email landed in my inbox, I didn't flinch. Because while Isabel thought she was executing a perfect escape, she never realized she was walking straight into a plan more carefully crafted than anything she'd imagined. a plan I had set in motion the moment I stopped trusting her smile. By Monday morning, I received the formal letter from her attorney, a sleek digital PDF from a downtown firm that specialized in high-asset divorce litigation. The tone was sharp, almost smug. It stated that Isabel Alex intended to pursue a 50-50 division of all marital assets, including but not limited to real estate holdings, investment accounts, retirement savings, and business interests. They were requesting full disclosure, immediate access to financial documents, and a list of all accounts in my name. The irony didn't escape me. While Isabel was likely sipping cocktails with Julian somewhere in a ski lodge hot tub, her legal team was preparing to carve up a fortune she believed was just sitting there, unguarded, unprotected, ready to split down the middle. But she had no idea the rules had already changed. I forwarded the letter to Claire, my attorney, and scheduled a call that afternoon. "They're confident," I said. "They have no idea what we've done." She was calm, almost amused. "They're walking into a minefield." The next day, Claire responded formally. A neatly written letter citing the exact trust structures, the transfer dates, the legal basis for the reclassification of all marital property into separate protected entities. Every asset had been moved, legally documented, and notarized. The house was no longer in our joint name. The investment portfolio had been split into a protected entity, with me as sole trustee. The business accounts, my consulting firm, and associated client revenue were similarly shielded. All perfectly above board. I'd even had the foresight to update the property deeds. The house Isabel was so sure she'd be entitled to. It now belonged to a trust with my niece listed as the secondary beneficiary. Claire had helped me ensure that every angle was accounted for, every crack sealed. Isabel's attorney replied 3 days later. His tone had shifted from confident to cautious. "We'd like to schedule a conversation regarding the timeline and circumstances of the asset transfers," he wrote. "Our client has expressed concern regarding financial secrecy and possible concealment." I knew what that meant. They were starting to realize they didn't have the leverage they thought they did. I could almost hear the conversation between Isabel and her lawyer. "What do you mean the house isn't in his name?" "What do you mean? I signed off on the trusts." The panic creeping into her voice. The realization that she hadn't read a single document before signing it. They demanded an emergency hearing to freeze accounts. Claire responded with court-certified documents proving the legitimacy of every move I'd made. There was no fraud, no deception, just planning. Her accusations fell flat. The judge declined their motion. At this point, Isabel tried to shift tactics. She reached out through mutual friends. I ignored it. Then she left a voicemail. Calm at first, then pleading. "Nathan, this is spiraling out of control. Can we please talk? Just us." But there was nothing left to discuss. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She'd tried to gut me financially, and I had no intention of letting her rewrite that story with tears and charm. As the legal dust settled, her attorney went quiet. My attorney, on the other hand, kept everything organized, a clean paper trail airtight. I didn't want revenge. I wanted protection. I didn't want a fight. I wanted freedom. And by staying calm, thinking ahead, and trusting the law to do what it was designed to do, I had it. Until this point, everything had followed a legal rhythm: cold letters, firm replies, procedural filings. But what turned this from a divorce case into something far more serious was what I discovered next. It began with a simple question: who was paying for Julian? That name, Julian, kept echoing through everything. I'd heard it enough from Isabel to suspect he was more than just a colleague, more than a creative partner or trusted peer. But what I hadn't anticipated was how deeply entwined he was in our finances. I started by digging into the company reimbursement documents Isabel had casually saved on our shared drive months ago. She must have forgotten about them. Inside were scanned expense reports, hundreds of dollars in client entertainment rideshare receipts, high-end dinners in places far from her supposed business meetings. One receipt stood out: a dinner in Chicago, during a trip she told me was in Phoenix. I checked Julian's Instagram. Sure enough, he had geotagged that same restaurant the same night. Smiling in a booth, 2 wine glasses on the table. I kept going. Tracked down hotel invoices billed to our joint card. Isabel had marked them as work travel, but the names on the room bookings told another story. At least 3 weekends at boutique hotels in Aspen, Santa Fe, and New Orleans, none of which matched her conference calendar. Each one coincided with Julian's remote work schedule. He never posted selfies with her, but the timestamps of their social media activity were always perfectly aligned. I saw her in the background of one boomerang clip at a rooftop bar, her hand brushing across the table. A moment she didn't think anyone would notice. Then came the real blow. Julian wasn't even a full-time employee at her firm. He was a freelance branding consultant on a 6-month contract which Isabel had personally approved. That wasn't just an affair. It was a conflict of interest. She'd used her senior position to bring him into the company and then used company resources and our personal accounts to fund their relationship. Flights, meals, hotel rooms. And most damning of all, a corporate wellness retreat invoice billed to the company that included both of their names. It wasn't just unethical. It was actionable. I brought all this to Claire, my attorney. She didn't flinch. "This is no longer just about asset division," she said. "This is fraud, embezzlement. You've been documenting everything." "All of it," I said. "Dates, receipts, screenshots, location tags, bank records. I have it in folders organized by category and location." Her response was immediate. "We're going to use this." She drafted a new legal filing one that not only pushed for full asset protection, but also detailed Isabel's misuse of marital funds and her abuse of corporate expense privileges. We included documentation of over $27,000 spent on Julian, directly his flights, his stays, his Uber rides, even groceries, paid for from joint accounts masked as business expenses or travel perks. I even found 2 Venmo payments labeled J Jim and J Rent. Isabel wasn't just cheating. She was investing in a man who saw her as a gateway, not a partner. And when the legal notice was delivered to her attorney's office detailing our allegations, the tone of the case changed completely. Her side went silent. No more demands, no more threats, because now they knew. She hadn't just broken a vow, she'd broken the law. The meeting was set for a Wednesday afternoon at Claire's office. Neutral ground. Polished oak table, filtered sunlight, 2 bottles of untouched water between us. Isabel walked in alone. No smile, no makeup, no Julian. Just a tired look in her eyes, the kind that comes from realizing a fantasy has unraveled faster than expected. She sat across from me and tried to speak first, but Claire was already laying out the documents. Bank statements, hotel receipts, itemized charges on joint accounts, evidence that left no room for denial. Isabel kept her gaze low-flipping pages without speaking. Then Claire placed the final sheet in front of her, a formal settlement offer. "You will retain the $62,000 already withdrawn," Claire said calmly. "In exchange, you waive any future claim to all marital assets, business holdings, properties, investments, retirement accounts. Everything else is off limits." Isabel glanced at me, eyes full of something between disbelief and desperation. "That's it," she said quietly. "That's all I get after 17 years." I looked at her without anger. "You already got what you took. This is what's left." Her lawyer tried to speak, but Isabel raised a hand. "Nathan, I made a mistake." "No," I said. "You made a choice." Over and over again. She hesitated, then signed. Just like that, the war was over. She stood to leave, but paused at the door. "Julian's gone," she said. "He left when the money ran out. I didn't flinch. Then I guess you both got what you were really after." A week later, Claire confirmed the settlement was finalized and court-approved. No more claims. No more threats. Isabel had officially given up her rights to everything she thought she was entitled to. And I had no intention of looking back. For the first time in months, my life felt still again. Not empty, just quiet, controlled, whole. Because revenge isn't always about destroying someone else. Sometimes it's simply about ensuring they can never destroy you. I could have ended it there, let the settlement speak for itself, and walk away. But part of me knew Isabel's story wasn't quite finished. She had tried to bury me financially, and when that failed, she'd handed everything over to Julian. And Julian, as it turned out, was far more vulnerable than he let on. I paid a quiet visit to the upscale fitness center where Isabel first met him. I wasn't angry. I was curious. I asked to speak with the manager and explained I had a concern about one of their trainers working without proper certification. They hesitated at first, but when I gave the name and a few details, their expressions changed. I wasn't the first to raise questions. Turns out Julian had submitted a fake certification and online printout that didn't match the database of licensed trainers. Worse, several female clients had filed informal complaints about his conduct. Nothing had escalated to a formal case yet. But my tip was the final push the management needed. Within a day, Julian was quietly removed from the staff roster. His contract terminated, and because his visa was tied to that gym position, his legal standing in the U.S. was now under review. A week later, Isabel called again. Her voice sounded hollow. Julian lost his job, she said, and now there are issues with his visa. We might have to leave the country. I didn't say anything at first. Then I simply replied, "That sounds like a you problem." She didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Julian had vanished from her life as fast as he'd entered it. And with no job, no legal status, and no income, the man she'd once called her future had become a burden she could no longer carry. What started as an affair ended as a liability, and the money she thought would buy her freedom had barely lasted the season. Sometimes justice doesn't need to arrive in court. It arrives quietly in job terminations, frozen bank accounts, and canceled visas. And in that silence, the truth becomes painfully loud. 3 months later, I sold the house. Too many rooms filled with echoes. I moved into a smaller place in South Austin, quiet, sunlit, easier to maintain. I focused on my clients, helped them build safeguards they never knew they needed. Word spread. Men started coming to me, not just for portfolio advice, but for guidance on how to protect themselves in life too. Sometimes they'd ask me, "How did you stay so calm?" The truth is simple. You don't need to scream when you're prepared. You don't need to chase justice when you've already built a wall no one can tear down. Isabel once said, "I was too measured, too restrained, but that restraint saved me." In the end, she lost the one thing she never realized I valued more than money: peace. So if this story stayed with you, if it hit a little too close to home, let it be a reminder plan, with clarity, love, with open eyes, and never leave your future unguarded. And if you're still here, drop a comment like, "I'll never sign anything without reading it again." It tells me you're listening. It tells me you're learning. Subscribe if you want more stories that don't just entertain, but open your eyes.